Testing, testing, testing. Okay. Oh, God. So, let's have a gander. Pardon me. Sorry about that. Right. Okay. So, what are we doing? What if... Shush, computer. So, what have we done? What have we done? What have we done? We've basically made a load of rules for senses, different kinds of difficult terrain you may come across, falling, altitude, swimming, and we're moving into combat. So I'm using the 5th edition SRD combat rules as a basis. Largely because there is far too many things to have to try and consider when... Oh, fuck. I haven't changed that. Give me just a second, everyone. I fucked up. Here we go. Give me just a second. We're having some internet issues, which is just what you want. Okay, is everything working? Good. Yes. Sorry about that. That was a cock up on my end. In that I seem to have accidentally gone live with the wrong thing. Yes, today we are doing games design. I just cocked up my design piece. Okay, so hello. So, as I said, currently we're working on the combat rules. I'm basically porting over the 5th edition combat rules from the SRD because I am not prepared enough to write an entire combat set of rules from scratch. And the SRD is now Creative Commons, so I can do that. Yeah, basically, so quick catch up because I kind of spent all the previous one we did of these catching up. We've set down trait tests, we've got falling forwards, advantage, disadvantage, party challenges, trait skills, learning, custom skills, what marks of fates do. We've worked out what inspired actions do. We've wrote down what concepts do, long rest, short rest, social rules, relationships and bonds and what you can do with them. Exploration and travel. We've said travel is when you're moving to a place you know. Exploration is when you're searching something that you don't know. We've got food and drink rules. We've got environmental rules. We've done darkness, different sites. We've got difficult terrain. We've got falling, water stuff. And then we're on to active time, which is basically combat. So as I said, I'm partially porting over the combat rules from 5e and then using them as the template, which I edit. Because actually we want to do stuff entirely different, but it gives me a good basis to base my writing off. What else? We have sorted out cosmology. There have been some slight changes to the cosmology. What was it? It's the realms primordial. There is now a realm. There is now an elemental plane of thunder and an elemental plane of fungi and decay. Which is important, as I had to point out to someone the other day, because for the rules as far as we are concerned, the rules as far as we're concerned, druids have a lot of play with the elemental planes. So that's that. We're going to look at potentially mechanizing creature size, because I believe the only real thing currently is a small character can move for another person's space, and if they're hostile, and they can't use large weapons. So I'm gonna have a think, and we might have it where your size category has some effects on mechanical rules that are just whose space can you move through. What else have we done? Creature types still have the same amount of work to do. But yeah, basically the key thing is I want to do combat rules, and then once combat rules are done, we can go into the character creation stuff. So at the moment, I'm kind of jumping to and fro, trying to work out how exactly I want this to work. How I currently want it to work, my current feeling is every character will start with every round of combat with 3 action points. You can. Oh yeah, there's been a lot of progress. As I said, the core tenets of rules, it's really combat, and then it's character creation. Once we hit character creation, it's going to be great because I can stretch my muscles, as it were, so to speak. Combat is the only going to be pain because it's somewhat. Combat is somewhat in depth. I also am trying to adapt the combat rules to be easier on Theatre of the Mind. It also doesn't help that I can't just go, here are the combat rules for D&D. Have fun, because we are building the game around an action point system rather than a major action, minor action system. So the key things we've written so far is basically, when it comes to combat, unless stated otherwise, an action can only be taken once per turn. So even if an action costs 1 action point, you cannot take it 3 times, you can take it once. The only exception thus far is the movement action, which you can take twice in a turn. And the first time it will cost you 0 AP, and the second time it costs you 2 AP. This basically being the dash action, but there's no point in me calling it the dash action because it's just movement. You just take movement twice. Currently, actions I'm considering is an attack action. Does what it says on the tin, works like D&D. I want to make an aid action. I don't think I quite want the help action, which is just you have advantage. I've got to think about how do I make that work. I've got a couple of ideas based off experiences with other TTRPGs. We have 1 reaction point. I've got to work out what we want to be able to do with a reaction. Which is a bit difficult. Because it has been suggested that perhaps one thing you could do to make actions and reactions more interesting is not having attack of opportunity as a default reaction that anyone can do, but trying to make attacks of opportunity more something that you have to kind of spec for, primarily because it allows for both sides of the combat to have a bit more flexibility in how they move if they're not going, attack of opportunity is going to happen. Obviously you'll have critical hits. That's not going to change. They could potentially do that. I'm not quite sure at the moment. Because we currently do have that if you roll a natural 1, you will get a mark of fate. And the natural 1, one of the things you can spend that mark of fate on is to recover 1 action point. So there's already kind of that in the play. Also, I don't want to have too many ways to easily recover action points, because that kind of will knock the flow of certain classes. Because currently how we are considering it is it's an if because I've not worked out exactly how I want it to work yet, because each class kind of has to have something it's built around. My current considerations are fighter will gain effectively combat stunts as part of the core class, and what it does is they have opening moves, standard moves, like flourishes, and then they have closing moves. And so they can take the attack action, they can get extra attack, and that's all well and good. You know, their attack action will be better, they just get to monk things. But instead what they can do is they can I think the best way to describe it is like a flow chart. Effectively, it's they make an action, that's the opener, and then they can spend their action points to add steps in. Um, and then obviously the more successes they have, the more the more powerful their effects become. But effectively, how the class progresses, they will get more AP as they level to allow them to form longer chains of combat. Whereas Monk, who I'm looking to be making just a general martial artist, their thing will be that they have effectively combo moves, and if they manage to successfully get off the combo, then they will get to recover AP to let them continue chaining combo moves. So Monk kind of is built around recovering AP to do more moves, whereas Fighter is you just get a longer chain of events. Each class kind of has their own puzzles I'm currently trying to work through. Because largely I've been going to people I know just, hey, what problems do you have with X class? And then it's like, here is the deluge. Here is the deluge of opinions. And it's like, great, wonderful, fantastic. But I do have ideas. I think the biggest thing is going to be. I could talk about class design, I think, partially because I have a lot of thoughts about it and it'll make the stream a bit more interesting than me editing combat rules. So we can, and also it comes back into combat with AP and stuff. So the core conceit of my class design is the best class in the game is Warlock in feel. It's not necessarily numbers wise the best class in the game. I think that tends to come somewhere between Paladin, Cleric, that kind of thing. But for feel, a lot of people always love Warlock. And the reason people love Warlock is its customizability. Because if you think about it, every class, it's here is your class. So it's a nice class. You might like it, you might hate it, and you get a subclass. And that subclass is where you get flavor. And if you get a subclass at level 3, your subclass is not the key defining trait. If you get it at level 1, or technically level 2, the subclass is a defining part of how your class operates. Which is all well and good. I have no problem with that design concept. The problem is it's very limited. But if you ask most people, Warlock, you get your subclass at level 1. This is who your patron is. Great. But then at level 3, you get a pact. And this gets determined so much about how you play, because it could be you are really good with a melee weapon, you are really good with a familiar, or you're a really good caster who basically gets a wizard spellbook for ritual spells. And then you have Eldritch Invocations from 2nd level. So your first 3 levels it, pick a pact, then pick some Eldritch Invocations, it's Patron, Eldritch Invocations, Pact. And your Eldritch Invocations get to modify your pact. They get to modify everything else about your class. Yes, it's a subclass. It's a, short rest reliant class. And if you don't do a lot of short rests, it's not as powerful as other classes. But for pure customizability, Warlock is the superior choice. Followed by Artificer, because Artificer get the infusions, which kind of gives the similar thing to Eldritch Invocations. And they kind of had this idea with well, I shouldn't say. I'm going to approach something with a similar tactic Wizards did, but whereas Wizards did it because they made optional class features, which is basically you can look at your class feature, cut it out, and replace it with a different class feature. And the reason they did that is it was their band-aid to fix the class until 1D&D happens. What I want to do is I want to have the choice of optional class features, but I'm not designing it as here is the band-aid to fix the problem. I'm using optional class features to give you a choice. So let's have some examples. So for Barbarian, the Barbarian class, you will get to pick a emotion. Anger, sadness, joy, that kind of thing. You then get to pick unarmored defense or armor proficiency. You can either be really good without armor, or you can wear plate armor. Choice is yours. You get to pick as a barbarian which of the two you go down. And then you get to channel the emotion that you picked earlier. So you might rage, but you might also do something else. And at this point, you're already starting to see you're getting choices, and those choices get to impact things. There'll be some mechanics where there is no choice, it's just this is an aspect of your character. But you get choice. What's another good example? Bard I haven't really come up with yet. Bard I need to think about. Bard is difficult because I kind of like Bard. Let's have a look at the list of classes. Where are the classes? So you're barbarian, you're bard, cleric. Cleric, I want you to be able to choose. So, if you wanted to play a cleric as it's presented now, I would call that the monotheistic cleric. The monotheistic cleric is like there's one deity, that's the person I'm going for. There might be part of a pantheon, but I am devoted to one deity. What I want to be able to do is for you to be able to go, okay, I can be part of a pantheon, and I can effectively pray to multiple deities. I'll still have a primary domain, but I'll have some secondary domains I can call upon. And then perhaps trying to do a cleric option that is, I am not about a deity, I'm entirely about a concept. Druid, I want to, for example, go, you do not have to be a wild shaper. You can replace wild shape with getting a familiar. Probably something about elemental planes. I really like the idea of the four inner planes, which is life, decay, metal, and lightning, will be tied to subclasses. You have to be a subclass. You have to effectively devote yourself if you want to study them. But I want to give the option of kind of being able to study the elements, and you can pick one element you study above all others, or you can kind of master the four elements, as it were, the four classical elements of air, fire, earth, water. And then there might be another option as well as wild shape of like being able to use ley lines and the like to teleport about the place. It's kind of that thing where you would pick it based off what do you want what do you want your person to be in relation to campaign. It might be another one I was considering was perhaps having it where the druid can take up a kind of potion brewing. They could be potion based perhaps. Fighter, as I said, is going very much down the stunt method. That one doesn't have so much. The choice isn't so much that you're getting to pick a different class feature, it's more the class features are giving you a list and you get to pick a few to choose for your character. Martial artist, as I said, is combo actions. Paladin. I don't know what I want to do with Paladin. Paladin is weird. Paladin is weird. I'm not quite sure. What I might let you do is perhaps swap out Smite for another ability. I know I've got to think more about Paladin. Scion, we've already designed a class. I don't really do much there. Ranger. Oh, Ranger requires so much work because the first thing I did was I went, okay, tell me everyone, what do you think of when you think of Ranger? And everyone went, we think of Aragon. And I went, ah, shit. So it's like, okay, how do I boil down Aragon into a character? So one thing I'm thinking of doing is actually going back to original Ranger. But instead of going, you pick a specific environment, it's you pick a plane, and depending on the plane you pick, depends on the bonus you get. Instead of spell casting, you can choose to have an animal companion or something else. And then if you pick the companion subclass and you already have a companion, it gets better. Otherwise, you get a companion and spellcraft or whatever. Yeah, just trying to tie Ranger to some of the other planes, maybe. Rogue, we're going to make a specialist. The key conceit that I and others, when we were kind of discussing Rogue, was Rogue is pretty damn good, but it has a problem in that the Rogue assumes that you're going to be playing the Fifi stealth character, and the problem is D&D stealth mechanics are kind of shit because it's very much this binary. I roll stealth. Am I hidden? Am I not? What conditions do I need to become stealthed, etc., etc., etc.? And it was pointed out that if you consider the rogue as a class that is entirely designed around the stealth skill, and that you could consider having other skills, then it gets interesting. Because you could go, okay, I have a rogue that is based around the medicine skill. I know exactly where to stab you the worst to make you die quickest. If you took performance, you could be a dancer who fights, etc., etc. And effectively, your sneak attack becomes a skill attack, as effectively you use whichever is your primary skill to do the damage. So that's fun. Got to work out quite how to mechanize that. And then Sorcerer is the very trans caster. Yeah, Sorcerer is pretty good as it is. It's just going to be very trans experience. A lot of body transformations as part of it. Warlock, I'm tempted to see if it is possible to make the Binder and the Warlock play together. And then Wizard, I just need to rewrite Wizard. I'm just going to start from scratch with Wizard. I hate Wizard. It's so boring. I'm just going to start from scratch and kind of basically look at what I did for Scion, look at what I did for okay, and look at what I did for Druid, and basically go, okay, how can we make you as interesting as them? And then I need to sit and think, because I have some other class ideas. Obviously, I'm going to need a class that plays with the crafting system, which in traditional D&D is Artificer, but I can't use Artificer, so I've got to make something new. But I've got to effectively have a class that plays with the crafting system. Got to have a class. Um, and then I've got to try and make a class that plays. Yeah, like an engineer, artificer, tinkerer. Basically, I need something that I need to work out what the crafting system is and then make a class that plays with the crafting system. Not a class that makes the crafting system exclusive to them, just a class that makes and interacts with the crafting system easier, I think is the key. And then one I've been tempted by is trying to make not exactly the Blood Hunter, but something like kind of the Blood Hunter meets the Witcher meets Dragon Age, Grey Wardens. Kind of most fantasy settings have that group who are really good at hunting monsters. Which someone will say, isn't that Ranger? And it's like, it depends how we go with Ranger. That could always be an option in Ranger. Yeah, it very much depends how Ranger comes out, I guess. Yeah, it's the difficulty of trying to make interesting classes. And then, yeah, if I haven't been able to introduce Binder into Warlock, I might try and make a class about binding things. Like a host class. And then I think we've got some weird classes, we've got some normal classes, we've got some spellcasters, some psychic casters. Got kind of all the things covered. Oh god, I've already started coming up with ideas for like classes and subclasses. And my hope, but not a promise, is if possible, I would like to be able to have it that subclasses, the game is compatible enough that like you could have a subclass and transfer that over to an associated class in this. Mainly because I own God knows how many third-party books with subclasses, and it's like, it would be nice if I could still use them. To be fair, there's a lot of classes, it would be nice if I could still use them. Yeah, I'm just trying to think, what changes would I make? What options would I give to Paladin? Paladin currently, the main option that comes to me is like trying to is maybe going with the, are you a good knight or are you a bad knight? And if you're a bad knight, giving you like necrotic damage and a bunch of effects, and if you're a good knight, it's like, here's a bunch of good effects. The fuck is a Malcolm Invoker? Oh, let's have a look. What the hell was a Malcolm Invoker? 3.5. Okay. Here we go. Malcolm Invoker. Complete scoundrel. Daring summoners known as Malcolm Invokers bargain with their lives. Alignment non-evil. Interesting. Bluff and knowledge the planes. Augmented summoning. And spell focus. What the fuck was augmented summoning? You summon creatures better than normal. Spellcast level 2. Creatures you summon with any spellcast summoning spell are slightly enhanced. They gain 1 more die of hit points, but they are not treated as +1 creatures. And a +1 competence bonus to their attack and damage rolls. God, I've not touched this in so long. Language Celestial Infernal. Ability to cast Summon Monster 3d4 2+ int. At each level beyond first, you gain new spells per day. You gain new spells per day and increase caster level. If you also gain level in spell class which you belong before adding the prestige class level, you do not, however, gain any other benefit the character class would have gained. You can attempt to trick evil creatures you conjure into serving you for longer than they normally would. Interesting. For the purpose of casting conjuration spells, you can ignore any restriction that forbids you from casting spells of certain alignments. Planar binding, classic. Skill focus, you get skill focus bluff. Once you obtain 5th level, whenever you summon monster spell to summon 1 or more evil-like creatures, you summon an extra creature of the same kind. Okay. Of course, because they only had 10 levels. Interesting. Huh. Malcolm Invoker, so you were a non-evil summoner. Interesting. See, no, I'm just thinking a second. Because I've not really considered a summoning class. I said you've got ranger with an animal companion. Hmm. What class? I probably wouldn't make it a full class. It feels like it could be a subclass, though. I mean, if you remove the requirement of the creature having to be evil that you summon, it would probably make the good basis for a conjuration subclass for wizard. Definitely wouldn't suit sorcerer. Maybe suit warlock. Maybe suit a warlock. Interesting. Something to think about because I haven't really thought about casters, so to speak. Um, Sorry, wrong thing. I thought about casters. I haven't thought about summoners. Because kind of summoning's that awkward bit of any magic system where you sit there and you go, oh, how do I put this? Summoner has the slight problem that you've got to consider all of these different things, like how does summoning spell work? What is it summoning? How do you do it? Um, what I would probably state is I would probably want to do it like the D&D next play tests, because this is what I'm gonna probably do for Wild Shape. Is here is a stat block, which I'm sure will piss off some people because they'll be like, I like going through the monster manual. It's like, yeah, but having dungeon mastered, it's really annoying to have someone go through the monster manual, find a specific monster, become the specific monster, and then because you didn't think about it, there's like some weird special rule in the specific monster's text that means that you get to do something funky, and it just sucks. So it's like, yeah, I'll just go. Here is a stat block. Have fun. Um, yeah, but this is the thing. It's going to be a lot of me trying to a lot of this is me just trying to come up with interesting ways of keeping the classes interesting. Because the thing is, if I pick a fighter, I've played one fighter. The only real things that change, like your background may change the odd bit. Your race will change a couple of traits. The majority of what changes a fighter is which subclass do you pick. Cool, there's only so many, so once you've done them all, you kind of run out of fighters. You can multi-class, but that's its own complex rule set that doesn't help anybody. Yeah. So I think I like the idea that trying to just give more options to each class, it keeps them interesting, it keeps them replayable, and also hopefully gives people what they're looking for. I mean, the biggest problem I'm going to have at the moment is I think the biggest bit that's going to be truth or tell is it's not backgrounds. Here we go. It's going to be the ancestry because my hope is that between each ancestry given and the 10 ancestry features you get to choose between, people will be able to find a combination that lets them play the character they want to play. The question is if I'm successful. But that's its own complexity of just trying to get a net that's wide enough to hopefully catch all of the general character ideas that come about. That's going to be the difficulty. Because it's like, everyone's like, I want to play an animal person. It's like, okay, but how many weird animal features do I have to account for? Because there's a lot of space in. If the furry community has taught me anything, there is a lot of space in. It's an animal person. The main joy is once we've made the core classes, I can work on adapting the subclasses I've already made for like urban campaign in for these new classes. The other thing I can do is start working on the other classes I've been waiting to do for a while, because I've been wanting to make a set of subclasses based on dragons. I've been wanting to do a bunch of subclasses based on death. That's one of the things I want to do with Paladin is get some weird oaths. I would love to be able to give players the chance to play not oath breakers, but actual oathed death knights, oathed hell knights. Because it's like, oh yeah, you could play Oath of Conquest. That's lawful evil-ish. It's like Darth Vader. It's like, okay, that's a very specific. Because it's entirely about you will make the people be scared of you. And it's like, okay. But on the other hand, let's have the option of having some draconic subclasses over draconic classes. I don't think I could justify making an entire class just about dragons as much as I wish I could. But yes. But no, my hope is just that there are options to keep everyone excited. Um, that hopefully my mechanical choices get rid of some of the issues of D&D. Like, we're not using alignment. Alignment is very much D&D's thing. And if we are being our own separate game, I do not see the reason we have to keep using it. Uh, like, a character is a character. That there is no supernatural force pulling them to being good or evil or anarchist versus hegemonic. It's it's at the end of the day a character as a character. Like, there are still supernatural evils. There are still supernatural good. I could have wanted, but nothing's stopping me. Technically, you are correct. Nothing is stopping me. It's more there isn't a design space that I could see. Like, things we are covering pretty well cover all of the weird classes. Like, I would have to have a very clear mechanical or narrative brief to make a new class. It's easy for me to say that's a subclass. It's very difficult for me to say that's a class. Because a lot of it's very easy to go, this class isn't perfect, so I make a new class, and then you just end up with class bloat. And it's like, yes, but you see, because we have kept them somewhat distinct. You've got fighter, who is about playing with the AP system as a long chain of events, whereas the martial artist is about comboing. The specialist is about skills. The battle channeler is about emotions. Each of them will fight differently in a martial setting. It's yeah. I mean, you've already also got you've got the psychic fighter, you've got the magic fighter with paladin, you've got the other magic fighter with ranger. You could, yeah, because technically you've got the arcane magic fighter, because you have arcane knight and blade singer, depending on which end of the spectrum you want to be. You have the Cyanite for fighter, which means that this is the thing. It's all of these cases. It's like, yeah, we already have a class that does the thing. I don't really know where a new class could go that would add something to the game, as it were. Yeah, you could go with mount classes. The problem there is you then go to, okay, why can't other class do the thing? Why can a fighter or a paladin not ride on the back of a dragon and fight with it? And you could go, oh yes, that may be true, but then you're kind of going, okay, but if you make a class that's really good at that thing, you kind of either end up excluding others, or you make them so much better that there isn't much point. There's also the problem of, okay, what happens if you go on an adventure and you can't take the dragon with you? It just gets messy. It's like all the people that are coming out with all the pet classes, where it's like, oh yeah, I want to be a Pokemon master, and it's like, okay, But on the other hand, you kind of can get the pet field. You either get a dedicated pet and you stick with it, which is Ranger, or you get kind of lesser versions with Artificer subclasses and some of the other subclasses, or you go the opposite direction and you go, okay, I'm just going to be really good at casting conjuration spells and summoning things. It's yeah, it's difficult. It's like Binder, I can see the reason to make a Binder class because it works differently to everything else. You're making a deal with an entity every day, and it has roleplay restrictions, and it affects the way you play the game. A class that can ride dragons, I'd rather just have really good mount combat rules and maybe have some subclasses spread out for mounts. Maybe like go, there's a paladin or a fighter subclass that's like, this is the dragon rider subclass. They're good with mounts. They're even better if the mount is a dragon, rather than making it a full class. Um, but yeah, it's like Pathfinder had one where it was like, oh, what happens if you mix a sorcerer and a barbarian? And it's a really cool idea. But I made that, I converted it then to 5th edition, going, okay, well, there's a barbarian subclass, and you pick your bloodline, and effectively it works the same as Path of the Totem. But it's at each level, your bloodline gives you an effect. It's like, okay. And I think that's the thing. There's a lot of it's really easy to fall into the trap of, I'll just make another class, when actually what you could do is make a subclass. Um, yeah, as I said, I've got to have either a very clear narrative, a bit like Binder, where it is a narrative unlike anything a class can do, or I've got to have a strong mechanical basis where it's like, this is playing with the mechanics in a unique way, but also doesn't exclude other classes from trying to experiment in that way. Um, which is why I always say Binder is the perfect example, because Binder is super unique. Binder, nothing is like a Binder. Uh, yeah, I'm just trying to think, like, is there anything interesting class-wise I could do? I could maybe make a class that's based around fusions, but again, the problem is, if I go down, here it's a class based around fusions. If you can't fuse with anybody, you suck. And also, if you get one of the things that do a fusion and you've not got someone of that class, it kind of weakens. I either make it that the class is a really weak identity because other people can do the mechanic, or other people can't do the mechanic, which then excludes them from this gameplay if no one plays the thing. It's difficult. It's difficult. How long have we been going for? Nearly an hour. Yeah, I'm just trying to think, what other classes could you do? I'm trying to think of the cosmology that we have written. I think you have pretty much every way you would cast a spell is unique. So at that point, you need to look beyond spell casting to something else. But then you look at martial and you go, well, fighter covers a lot of bases already. it's difficult. 3.5 has a lot of weird shit. The problem with 3.5 was it had too much weird shit. It had too many options. Like, the number of options were great if you literally just kept playing 3.5 forever and never played any other game, because there would probably always be options. Whether or not they were balanced, or any good, or not broken is a different matter entirely. But in theory, 3.5 had just an infinite number of options. But the problem is, and you're starting to see it with 5th edition. I'm going to be that person who says something negative about 5th edition. You're starting to see it in 5th edition. There are just a few too many options. Because every time it's here's a ton more feats, here's a ton more stuff, here's a ton more subclasses. It's like, so far they've managed to keep them distinct, but you're beginning to hit the thing where it's like, okay, is there too many? I mean, it also doesn't help. I've been using a lot of third-party products as well as first-party products, which drastically increases the number of options. It's why for Ancestries, when I actually look at it, I go, actually, I think I've got all the bases covered. Because while you could give me a weird example, my response is, okay, well, we use a custom combined template, a mix of this template with that ancestry and another ancestry, and you can kind of get what you're feeling. Yeah, the problem with Constitution is how do I offer it? Constitution is a really useful stat. It just really is hard to go off. I think I made one of my casting subclasses for Barbarian go off Constitution. Because one of the temptations whenever you do spellcasting is to go, okay, just make it require one of the mental stats, and then the line is, okay, you realise you're just making this class even harder to play because you're adding one more stat I have to care about. It's why one of the things we are doing for monkeys, we're getting rid of key, because key is one, it's slightly problematic and cultural appropriative, but also it it really doesn't add much except for make the monk an absolutely janky as fuck class. But yeah, because the problem is there are actually quite a few classes that specifically say have a high constitution. The problem is the reason they say have a high constitution is it's barbarian and monk who are the classes expected to be stabbed the most, because of the nature of their classes. Um, yeah, it's difficult. It's very difficult. Because it's like technically barbarian and yeah, barbarian and monk want high constitution. Um, you don't get to do much with it. You just get high constitution. Technically, if you played Blood Hunt, you also want high constitution. Um, but yeah, constitution doesn't get much. But it's also like the skills you would use constitution for. In the nature of constitution, doesn't really give much in the room of design. And there's always the people like, oh, you can use Constitution as your spell casting bonus, and it's like, because the other problem is if you make something. The big problem with Constitution getting used for anything other than hit points is the dexterity problem, which is you make a stat that is just too good. I mean, it's partially the problem that charisma casters have, is charisma is both a super useful social skill and it's a super useful casting skill. Likewise, dexterity is OP because dexterity can be used for acrobatics, which is often used to try and break a fall. Dexterity saving throws are probably the most common saving throws in the game, followed by wisdom. Dexterity skills are just solid across the board because it's things like stealth. And then if you focus your dexterity, you can then take a finesse weapon and light armor. Then you don't need strength, because why do you need strength? Because you're not using heavier armor. That's what the studded leather is for, and shield is for. You don't need that longsword. That's what the weapon with finesse is for. And if you get a magic weapon that has finesse, you could get really high damage of a decent weapon with just using your dexterity. Dexterity is just too good. Sorcerer, to a degree, you could argue it uses Constitution. Because yes, it does come from the body, but I would also argue that thing of charisma, if you look at how Sorcerer and Paladin channel it, it's almost like you're not using your personality like a bard is. You're effectively using your determination, your sense of self, as the focus of your paladin or sorcerer casting, which is why I would say that charisma does make some sense. The one I would say doesn't make sense out of all of them is, I guess, Warlock theoretically could make a bit of sense. It's very weird to have the force of will stat be kind of the Warlock thing. I would say Sorcerer deserves charisma more than Warlock does. Warlock is a bit weird, but then again, I also go, where would you put Warlock casting? Maybe. Oh, you could put it int, but the problem then is it gets really hard to tell what is the difference between a Warlock and a Wizard. You could see, actually, that'd be an interesting one. Putting Warlock under Wisdom. It gets weird because Warlock under Wisdom would be interesting because it would be the only arcane caster to use Wisdom. Because you have Druid, which is a primal caster in Wisdom. You have a Cleric, which is a holy caster in Wisdom. But you do not have an arcane caster. And it would also kind of tie nicely into the aspect that Druid, you're drawing your power from nature. Cleric, you're drawing your power from a god. Warlock, you're drawing power from a patron to put it under Wisdom. And then you would end up with, what would that be? That'd be, I guess then though, the casters get disbalanced because what you then end up with is you've got intelligence casting for Artificer Wizard, wisdom casting for Ranger, Warlock, Cleric, Druid, and then charisma casting for Paladin, Bard, Sorcerer. But then I would argue, should maybe the Ranger becomes an int caster, and then what you end up with is some very interesting bits there. To be honest, I think trying to balance the which caster uses what stat is a bit of a lost cause. Like, I can't say it's terrible because I am perpetuating this idea with my own design, but it's, yeah. The problem is you can't just have a magic stat, because if you had a magic stat, that would just break everything. The problem there is survival is a wisdom skill, which makes sense because survival is you drawing upon your past experience to notice the signs of tracks. Um, but this is it. I mean, the other bold choice is you have cleric, druid, wizard. Cleric, druid, wizard? Cleric, druid, wizard as the core caster of their domain, so primal, holy, arcane, have only one spell casting stat, but then sorcerer, paladin, ranger, warlock, bard, as and artificer as kind of the you are not the archetype of your spellcast school, get to pick, like they did with Bloodhunter. You get to pick what your spell casting thing is. Because then with Ranger, you could go, your Ranger is an int or whiz caster. A Paladin is a whiz or charisma caster. I might keep Paladin as charisma. Paladin is a very charisma class, I think, actually. Um, but Sorcerer, you could go is, I don't know, charisma something. I think I'd keep I think I keep Paladin Sorcerer's Charisma. I think Ranger would get to be an Intwiz. Artificer. Yeah, Paladin and Sorcerer to me sit comfortably in Charisma. Because it's about their power of them. Especially if we're going with the trans sorcerer route, where it is your soul, your strength of soul is what's channeling your magic. But no, I like Ranger could be an int whiz caster. Um, Warlock, you could be very cheeky and go Warlock. You get to pick between int, whiz, or ca. Basically, Warlock gets to pick. Warlock gets to pick their specific school of fuckery. Because Warlock is entirely based on how they interact with their patron. That would be fun. Having a spellcaster that just pick your stat. I could also see that being the thing that made the D&D community literally had a fit. Was going, what? How dare you let Warlock pick what casting stat it uses a character generation? How fucking dare you? And it's like, yeah. And we all know Warlock is the Gish class. Warlock is the class of, I'm going to multi-class you with everything. Why not lean into it by just go, yeah, you be whatever the fuck you want. Um, what could be Wizen and what would be into cat? Artificer, I'd be tempted to be a int cat. I could see an argument because, like, Artificer's a book reader, they're a fucking nerd, so they get to be int. But they also get to a artificer also puts a lot of themselves into what they make. So I could see the argument for artificer being an int caster, and then you could have bard be a wisdom charisma caster, because not only is a bard's thing about artistically making stuff, but you could also make the argument that bard needs to work off people. But then again, I also sit there and go that if you think about what a bard is, bards are remembrances of. They use the arts to cast. This is true. But what they also do is they are storytellers. They are sources of history and knowledge. So I would also argue that a bard, you could get away with. Bards and warlocks are the intwiz casters. They can be whichever of the three they like, as long as they, because effectively they are the most flexible of all casters. Here's me spitting controversial takes on games design. Yeah. Right, it is nearly 7 o'clock. We've been nearly going for an hour and a half, so I think I'm going to call it there. We will end with our controversial takes that I'm sure is not going to get me shouted at. Right, we're going to raid a Fron who is currently doing some slime magic. Yeah, thank you for joining. And I'd like to thank everyone else. Thank you all for joining. And we will see you all next time. One other thing, not this weekend, next weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we will be streaming because we will be raising money for Mermaids Charity and doing things involving fantasy that don't involve that one specific wizarding school. So, yeah, see you all around.